Now, so I've taken the fretboard, which in my case, I cut close down to that line with the bandsaw, and then just sanded it on the large sanding board down to the line. And I just clamped it in place here on my neck. And I've clamped it, the center line of my fretboard is lined up with the center line I have drawn down on the neck down there to get that center at this end. And I just pretty much centered it against the cheeks here down the neck. And as far as distance this way, I've lined the 14th fret slot with the edge of my cheek, so that's where the body will meet the neck. And I've clamped it in there temporarily to hold it in place, and that's where it's going to go. Now, when we go to glue on this really has a tendency to slip around. So it's nice to have a few alignment holes on it. And all I do is I got a 16th inch bit here. I'm going to drill a hole through the first fret off the side, going at the truss rod. Not right through, but just into the wood a bit. And the same up to the 11th fret. Again, not too far. No, those clamps a little bit too close there. I can't quite get in. I'll move that down a bit. Not too far in. You don't want to go through the back of the neck, that's for sure. Just a little bit of an alignment hole. And then I have 1 inch finishing nails, which will sit down in those holes and lock the neck, or the fretboard, in place on the neck, just like that when we go to glue. As alignment. Just like so. Now I'll keep it. Okay, we're ready to glue this on. So I've got a caul I'm going to use. It's one of those bars from doing the sides again, which I've also notched here to clear those two nail positioning nails up in there. So when that goes down over top of the fretboard, it'll clear those nails. Look at that, it's exactly the right length. You'd think it was made that way. The nails also, I've taken, they're here, but I took them and took my side cutter and trimmed them off just above the fretboard because they were sticking up too high even for the notches I'd cut in the caul. Okie doke. So all we're going to do here is take our fretboard and make sure that it's clean without bumps and stuff, and also make sure that the surface of your fretboard, or surface of your neck you're going to glue this to is clean and doesn't have any bumps or lumps in it. It'll be hard to get your fretboard glued on there well. We're going to use white glue on the fretboard. As I've mentioned before, white glue will soften easily with some heat later on down the road if you ever need to replace the fretboard on the guitar, or somebody needs to replace the fretboard on the guitar. And we just put some white glue on here. You want a fair amount. You don't want to be stingy with the glue on the fretboard. It takes a while. There we go. Get it on there. And then I take my plastic spreader here I have and spread that around. So it's covering the whole surface. Well, of course you can't see that, can you? Now, I didn't need to build a glue on the end that I did up here. You can back off on that a bit. That overhangs the end. But I'll just clean it up later with a paper towel once I get it on there. Okay. Now, take your alignment nails. Get one stuck through there. There. And the other one in place. And away you go. Oops. And away you go. That's better. Get those down. Tap them down a bit. And then put the caul on top, and then just get as many clamps on there as you can. I'll just clean some of the glue off the top here. Any kind of mess on. Set that caul in place. So. And then start clamping. And just put as many clamps on here as you can get. Get as much pressure on there as you can. We want to have the squeeze out if we can get it. Down by the heel here, put a large clamp right down here in the heel so you can get that clamp into position. And just pour with clamps. Okay, so I've used just about every clamp I own there, as far as that kind of clamp goes. And I'm just going to take a paper towel and get it a little wet and clean up some of this glue squeeze out. Particularly, you want to get the stuff underneath. If you had any on the bottom side of the fretboard that's exposed up here, you don't want the glue all through here. We'll do that surface later. And just basically clean it up before it all dries on you. Now, once the glue's dried for a while, take the clamps and the caul off, and then just remove those locator pins with a pair of side cutters and gently pry them out. They'll be glued in. Remember, we sand the top of this fretboard down quite a bit from here, so any little marks you make in it aren't going to make too much difference. There we go. Now, the next thing we're going to do is put what they call a radius or an arch on the fingerboard, on the fretboard, in this kind of dimension. Now, there's lots of ways of doing this. The method I use, I've taken a piece of 2x4, and the radius that I put on my fretboards is a 16-inch radius, which means, it's a circle, 16 inches large, a section of that circle, an arc out of that circle. And what I've done is I've taken a 2x4 and I have chiseled and sanded that curve out of this 2x4 in this dimension. I drew this by actually taking a 16-inch long stick, and I kind of sat this on here in the end of the bench and put a pivot on that stick and put a pencil line on my 2x4 to show that arc. And all I do is take a full sheet of sandpaper, lay over top of that arc, inside there, and then use that to run up and down the fretboard. And I'll work away at that. I've got 80 grit on here right now, and I'll do the bulk. I'll work away at the 80 until I get it down. You'll watch that the sanding starts on the outside edges, obviously, and then you can see the sanding lines move in towards the center line. And once you reach that center line, you're done. And once I've finished with the 80, I'll move up to a 120 and then a 220 before I stop. Now, you're going to find that now that we've put an arch on this, and especially up toward the sandwich end of the fretboard, the depth of the fret slots is now not quite enough. It needs to be 3/32. So all I do is I take the hand fret saw, set the stop at 3/32, and just go along and touch them up along the edges to make sure they're down far enough. The other thing that may have happened, you may have some debris, some glue or something got into those fret slots, and this will clean those out as well. Usually down this end, the nut end, there isn't a problem. That one's fine. Okay, let's talk for a second about putting frets in. Fret wire comes in many different sizes and softnesses and various things. But the medium gauge wire, this is the typical one if you use steel string guitars, and the hardness of it. You can buy it curved or straight. The curved is kind of nice because on a steel string guitar, which has a bit of a radius to it, it's already sort of bent and can be easier to put in. But the straight stuff goes in. If we're working with straight on a steel string guitar, you just do a little bend with your fingers to bend it approximately into the shape, and it'll be fine going in as well. I tend to buy straight because I also build classical guitars, and they have a flat fretboard, and you don't want it bent. So either way,